Bismillah, whenever you're ready.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala khayri al-bariyah. Nabina habibina Muḥammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Welcome to our fourth session on Risalah Qudsiyyah, the Jerusalem Epistle of Hujjat al-Islam, Abu Hamid al-Ghazālī rahimahullah. And we looked at last week, we got up to al-Rukn al-Sabi', seventh found fundamental. But then what I thought we'll try and do today, I didn't put it up, but let me just see. I should have the session slides up here somewhere. Hopefully you should be able to see what's going on. Right, yeah, here we are. So session 4. So what we hope to do, so everyone should be able to see session 4 outline slide. So what we hope to do is cover a rukn al-thamin. So we want to look at ta'wil and literalism. Ghazali's theory of signification, different meanings he gave the different levels of meanings of words, or the different levels of being, you can say, that things have, represented through the words, Hujjat al-Islam's law of interpretation, and his duality of meaning. Now, most likely, we're probably only going to get to A, I'll be honest with you, if we're going to try and wrap it up within sort of an hour, just over an hour. There are a few things that I need to do, so I might have to, I beg your pardon and bow out a bit early. But definitely for next lesson, we're going to be in for, doing B, C, and D. So the law of theory of signification, law of interpretation, and duality of meaning, because that's going to require, a whole session. So, but before that, I think last week we said that we'd want to go through Shaykh al-Islam's view on creation of the world and what he's trying to say on this particular, what's his views on it. And I'll try and sketch it out, and I'll see what people's views are, what their thoughts are on it. As far as I've understood it, I haven't put this handout up, which you can see now, Ibn Taymiyyah on the creation of the world, but I'll put that up into the folder, so you've got a copy of it. Now, we know that according to the mutakallimun, or definitely Hujjat al-Islam in Risalah Qudsiyyah, and as we'll come to see more and more, that Hujjat al-Islam asserts something which is known as divine aseity, that is, a doctrine where Allah is al-qa'im bi nafsihi, mustaqil li dhatihi. So Allah is a self-subsistent being. His being doesn't depend on anything at all. So there is no, he is ontologically independent in an absolute way, whereas all other things are ontologically dependent on him for their being and everything else. Yeah. Now the aseity features of this qa'im bi nafsihi is that Allah is incorporeal, he's not physical. We looked at that last week. He's definitely not composite. We looked at that last week. He's timeless. Again, we mentioned that last week. And he's immutable, he's unchanging. So these are 4 features of divine aseity, or Allah's ontological independence as a being. And that, of course, is encapsulated within our tradition with the phrase mukhalifun lil hawadith. So any temporally originated thing, anything that is finite or contingent, Allah is radically different from that. Radically in terms of he's ontologically different from that. So him being mukhalif is in his essence, of course his attributes as well, So him as a being, Jalla wa ala, is totally different from any created entity. He also upholds Hujjat al-Islam, rahimahullah, and we look at this later when we look at that divine attributes, divine actions as well. Obviously, he has an understanding of God's maximal power, of God's, thick omniscience, i.e., omniscience that is complete, and obviously Allah is a benevolent being, so he's interested and he cares for his creations. So Allah being independent and sovereign, according to the Risalah Qudsiyyah, what creation model best suits a being that is ontologically independent and sovereign? What creation model best fits a being that has aseity? And in the Risalah Qudsiyyah, it is, as we looked at, creation ex nihilo, or creation from nothing, or not anything. Now, so the creatio ex nihilo has the following theses, or the following aspects to it. So you can be able to see that on the screen. What's known as a temporal origination thesis. The world, according to Hujjat al-Islam, in the Risalah Qudsiyyah and elsewhere, the world has an absolute beginning in time. In fact, it's absolute sheer beginning. Yeah, and we're going to look at how Shaykh al-Islam challenges this idea. That there isn't that the Quran does not affirm a sheer absolute beginning. And neither does the Hadith. So we'll come to that. So temporal origination thesis, i.e., creatio ex nihilo means something brought into existence in an absolute way, from nothingness into absolute being. So from nothingness into creation, as an absolute act of creation. So the second thesis then is what's known as a production thesis. Every object begins to exist in the history of the universe, or the history of the world. As things come into being and pass out of being in the whole timeline of the universe. The sustenance thesis, everything is constantly in need of Allah's sustaining activity. So he's al-Razzaq, he's al-Rabb. And Ghazali will talk about this in the Af'al, the second foundation, which is the divine acts. What we call the existence conferral thesis. Nothing can exist unless Allah confers existence on a particular object. So you can't have being, you can't have existence unless Allah gives you existence, unless He confers it on you in an act of contingent benevolence. There was no necessity that He gave you being or did anything for you. Purely it is out of Allah's contingent act of benevolence. The intervention thesis, Allah can intervene in the ordinary course of nature to bring about extraordinary effects, or mu'jizat, as we call them. So these 5 theses comprise the creation model that we find, as I see it, in Risalah Qudsiyyah. The creatio ex nihilo, creation from nothing, has these 5 theses. Now, if we contrast that with what we're going to go through in terms of Shaykh al-Islam, Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, there's a bit of a difference here. Before I go on to that, are there any questions on what I've just mentioned now?
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
On the benevolence aspect, do we have that as a bona fide kind of sifa? I know
no, really, no, we don't.
Okay.
But that's why I put in brackets care, because people put loving. Maybe I should have taken right benevolent out and put put it under a different attribute of Allah. But we don't have, not in our tradition. We don't have benevolence as used in the contemporary literature. Yeah.
Doc, could you just give the production, please?
Oh, the production thesis. Yeah. So the production thesis, according to this model of creation, creatio ex nihilo, is that things come into being and out of being in the timeline of history. So from the universe, from its beginning until now, things were produced and things fell out of production, i.e. they came into being basically and they dropped out of being. That's it, really. That's all it means.
Oh, okay.
But that's different from D, because D is the stronger claim. Okay, you can have something temporal originate, that's fine, but to have existence itself, you can't have it unless Allah confers it on you. So to have being itself, you can't have that. Wujudiyya, existence, only can be acquired by Allah's act of conferring it to you. Whereas B is just a general statement about things are produced in time, in the timeline of history. Okay, I don't think Shaykh al-Islam would disagree with any of these except A. And I think this is the crux for him. And then we'll look at that now. All right, so this is a very Shaykh al-Islam, rahimahullah, you know, he's written about the nature of the world in many different places, and he's written them with nuance in many different places. I've just tried to narrow it down in the basic way that I can, yeah. And I haven't. Unfortunately, the handout isn't as systematic as just quick notes that I've jotted down. Hopefully, as I go through it, it might become a bit clearer. Now, the first thing to understand, of course, is Shaykh al-Islam is working from a different theological paradigm and a hermeneutical paradigm than Hujjat al-Islam. So Ibn Taymiyyah is working from a textual theology that has a different set of assumptions, whether metaphysical or hermeneutical, i.e. the nature of reality in Allah, and assumptions about how to interpret text and what the role of the text is and what the position of the text is. Now, from what I understand, from the few of the works that I've read, and obviously more works are emerging, more of his theology is emerging, so I've got to update this handout, yeah? Because in the last 10 years, last 8 years, we've had an immense amount of work produced on Shaykh al-Islam. So in light of that, I need to update this handout. So anyway, so he's not working from purely metaphysical speculation, right? That's the first thing. He's also assuming that true rationality, i.e. matters of the aql, do not contradict matters of the naql. And he's very clear about that. So that's his assumption. As I see it, Shaykh al-Islam, in presenting his philosophical theology, he's threading ideas, a mixture of philosophical ideas of Ibn Sina and the philosopher with scriptural references. So there's a lot of that going on, and I don't have time to unpack it in that because this is not the aim of our session. But I wanted to just give you his thesis on the world, just to contrast it with Hujjat al-Islam, Risalah Qudsiyyah. You see the different metaphysical assumptions underpinning each view. Right, so according to Shaykh al-Islam, here on letter B, the Mutakallimun held the following view. So take T as the moment of the world's origination, yeah? So the world came into being at time T. With this origination of the world at time T, all things, whether universals or particulars, yeah? So whatever metaphysical entity you can think of, whatever type of metaphysical category of things you can think of, for the Mutakallimun, they came into being at a particular moment in time, ex nihilo, yeah? So prior to T then, Allah was not engaged in any creativity or any activity whatsoever, although he existed independently and nothing was co-eternal or coexistent with him. Yeah. So the Mutakallimun believe that prior to Allah creating all of reality ex nihilo, he couldn't have been involved in any creative activity, because his creative activity would automatically bring about its effects. So he couldn't have been doing anything. He only did something at that particular moment in time. This is Shaykh al-Islam presenting what the Mutakallimun view is in general. Yeah. Now, what does that view entail for him? That view entails that the creation of the world marks the absolute and sheer beginning of everything. Yeah. So remember, that's A in our handout there. So our temporal origination thesis. Yeah. So the creation of the world at T marks the absolute and sheer beginning of everything. This also negates Platonism. Yeah. So there were no pre-existing eternal objects or anything like that. So prior to creating the world, Allah was not creating, otherwise the object would be coexistent with the creator, as I mentioned. Analogously, this is crucial for Ibn Taymiyyah as well. Analogously, prior to creating the world at time T, Allah was not doing anything. He was not moving, he was not speaking, he was not, there wasn't anything he was doing. He just was. Yeah. So these are some of the entailments from the view as the Mutakallimun's view as set out by Shaykh al-Islam. Now, given that view, yeah, Shaykh al-Islam agrees with the Mutakallimun on the following points, and the blues there are the quotes from the text. They're not my translation, that's Hoover's translation. But so Shaykh al-Islam agrees with the Mutakallimun on the following. He believes their view is wrong, but he agrees with them on the following. That Allah had no prior cause, obviously. Yeah? So nothing chronologically, whether that chronology is some metaphysical time that Ibn Taymiyyah intimates, a time that is not worldly time, but some other type of metaphysical time. So nothing was chronologically prior to Allah in a metaphysical way. And nothing was logically prior to Allah. He agrees with the Mutakallimun on that. He also agrees that all concrete particulars, a'yan, yeah, all objects that come into being temporally are preceded by non-existence. He agrees with that. But the genus, the universal for these particulars, they are uncreated. They are uncreated. So things come into existence, particular objects, what we call concrete particulars, things, specific individual things come into existence, but an abstract universal, like genuses and what species, these don't come into being. They're just generic categories that are uncreated. We'll come to the reason why he has to posit that, yeah? Why the universals are uncreated, even though the particulars that are instantiated, the concrete particulars that each individual objects in the world are created, he accepts that. He's agreement with them on that.
Okay. Doc, would you mind just clarifying what you mean by particular, universal? Very brief.
Right. So let's just say you got human beings, yeah? A particular human being, yeah? A human being is a person under the category of human being is an individual. Human is an individual, an instance, a concrete particular. You're a human, I'm a human. What do you and I share? We share in something called humanity. And that humanity is a universal. Because you can share in it, I can share in it, Imran can share in it, everyone can share it, who's a human can share in it. They can partake in it because they're also human as well. So they're sharing humanity. I'm a human being, I share in humanity. You see? So humanity is a universal. Come back, ask him if it's not clear. Let me know.
Are universal and genus the same thing?
I guess so. I mean, for our purposes, just forget. Just think of it as a generic category. Leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah, a generic category like a humanity. Any different object that can share in the same thing, that is a universal. So colors are universal. There's lots of things can share in the same color. Okay, so what was I saying? Okay, I'll come back to why he accepts universal, the generic category of something as being uncreated, whereas the particulars of that category, generic category, are not eternal. Okay, so he agrees with the Mutakallimun that there is no prior cause to Allah, whether that cause is chronological, metaphysical, or logical.
Someone has a question.
Sorry, yeah, go on.
Oh, we've logged out.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what just happened. Okay, I'll bring you back in when he
comes back. No worries. So he agrees with the Mutakallimun that all concrete particulars, objects that begin in time, are created. He accepts that they were preceded by non-existence. Every concrete particular or objects have temporal beginning. This does not mean that objects were pre-existent with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He agrees with the Mutakallimun on that. Divine acts and objects of divine acts are separate things. Now, some Mutakallimun may agree with that, some may not. The act and the thing brought about by the act are not separate according to some Mutakallimun. But whatever the agreement is with the Mutakallimun, he essentially thinks their view is wrong, is mistaken. Why? For the following reasons. The Kalam view, he says, contradicts nusus. It contradicts text. So prior to the creation of the creation of the world can't be the mark of sheer absolute beginning. Ex nihilo. Why? Because other entities existed before the world existed, like the Arsh, the Qalam that existed 50,000 years, Allah said, before, prior to write down everything of Allah's decree, and the Arsh was on water. So creatio ex nihilo of the world cannot be the mark of a sheer beginning. Of a sheer beginning. So for Shaykh al-Islam, he also says the view is wrong because the text intimates or suggests, Hadith and Quran suggest, that the world was created ex aliquo, not ex nihilo. The world was created from pre-existent stuff and matter. So the world wasn't created from not anything. Lam min la shay. The world was not created from nothing. It was created from something. Okay. The other reason why he says their view is wrong is that if Allah is only a creator meaningfully subsequent to his act of creating the world at time t, then prior to t, he must not have been an agent or creator in the proper sense of these words. But that can't be right. Why can't that be right? As we'll see now. Okay, so the other thing he says is that if Allah was not doing anything prior to creation, then his subsequent act to create must have been caused by something that is non-existent. What prompted Allah to then create if he wasn't doing anything beforehand? Now, if we take 7 and 8, we've got some problems, Ibn Taymiyyah says. If we take 7, that Allah was only a creator subsequent to his act of creating the world at time t, and before that he wasn't a creator or an agent in any meaningful sense of the term, then that implies that Allah lacked a property prior to t, but lacking a property is an imperfection, so that can't be possible. And if Allah then becomes a creator meaningfully after creating something at a particular moment in time, i.e. the world, then he gains a property at that time. But how could Allah gain a property? Something must have prompted him to do that act of creating, but what could have prompted him when there was nothing around to make him create that thing at that time? So he's saying that Allah lacking a property and then gaining a property at some point, for whatever reason that is, that's an imperfection. To lack a property and then to gain the property is an imperfection, because you had a lack. You didn't have it, then you had it. And if something makes you do something external to yourself, then that means you're imperfect, because in virtue of the thing external to you, you then acted. But Ibn Taymiyyah is making a further criticism that if there was nothing with Allah, then how can non-existent prompt Allah to do anything? You see? So he comes to the conclusion that Allah must always been acting, creating, doing, speaking, whatever he says that he does. He must have always been doing them at some point. Not at some point, he must have always been doing them, even before he created the world. Why? Because of these points I just mentioned, 5, 6, 7, and 8. One, because Revelation tells us he was doing these things, and it doesn't tell us that he wasn't doing these things. Second, the fact that if he wasn't doing these things, then he would have lacked the property. He would have lacked that attribute, and you can't lack something because that's imperfection. So this leads us to his perpetuity thesis. So prior to the creation of anything, Allah was perpetually creating and acting without that entailing objects of his creativity and activity are co-eternal with him. So what Ibn Taymiyyah wants to say is that Allah has always been a mutakallim from eternity, pre-eternity, and he will be post-eternity. Allah has always been a creator from pre-eternity, and he will post-eternity. Allah has always been an agent pre-eternally and post-eternally. He has always been doing these things, but him always doing these things doesn't entail that the objects of his actions have been with him. Ibn Taymiyyah doesn't say one follows from the other. But for the mutakallimun, that would have been one of the entailments. If he was creating from eternity, it would have meant the object of creation would have been pre-eternal with him. So there was never then a time, there was never a moment or a time, whether in divine metaphysical time, revelatory time, or whenever, there was never a moment or time, in inverted commas, in the divine life where Allah was activity-less. Because being activity-less means you lack an attribute that you claim to have, and that lack is an imperfection. So Allah has always been moving, acting, speaking from perpetuity, yeah? Now, obviously, the assumption Shaykh al-Islam is making, amongst other metaphysical assumptions, is that an entity is more perfect. An entity X is more perfect than an entity Y, if and only if, for any property F, X never failed to have X, F, but Y did. In other words, a being is more perfect than another being if it always had its qualities, i.e. it never lacked it at any one moment. And so that's what his underlying issue is. If you're saying Allah wasn't a creator from eternity, or a speaker, a mutakallim from eternity, or whatever, then you're saying he lacked those qualities. And lack is an imperfection. So that's the train of his thinking. That's the train of his thinking. Now, how does this relate to the origin of the universe? Well, first of all, he doesn't believe that the creation of the world is the act that marks the sheer beginning of everything, yeah, from nothing. That's the first thing. The second thing is that he upholds that Allah acts through choice, through will and power. Yeah. So whenever Allah wants to do something, he can do it. He can exercise his choice, and that choice can be actualized by his power. Yeah. So his will, his choice is exercised through the divine will, and then the choice that is produced by the divine will is then actualized by the divine power. And he's always been like this. But he accuses the mutakallimun of saying Allah wasn't like this all the time. You see? So that's the first thing to note, yeah? So Allah has always been like this prior to creating anything, and it will always remain like this post or after creating everything. So Allah's essence and attributes have no beginning and no end. He agrees with that. But what he does agree with is that an endless chain of events going backwards or things going backwards in the past is possible, is jaiz. It's not impossible according to the mutakallimun, based on the arguments we saw in the Risalah Qudsiyyah. So the Hujjat al-Islam claimed it's outright impossible for there to be an infinite regression of temporal phenomenon going backwards. But Shaykh al-Islam said that's possible. Just as it's affirmed for the future, yeah, just as it is affirmed for the future, there's nothing in principle to deny it for the past. So he says that we have to affirm that creation was never ending, or that there is a constant, endless chain of phenomenon going forward in time, endlessly. He says that that is a matter of text, because Jannah and Nar are two perpetual loci, the two perpetual places that go forever and ever, but they had a beginning, right? So he says, just as it's possible and obligatory textually to believe that, then similarly, there's nothing logically and in principle, according to the to reason, of there being an infinite regress going backwards, yeah, phenomenon going backwards in time. Now, this is where the universals comes in. Now, so all Shaykh al-Islam is saying, different from the mutakallimun, is that an infinite regression of temporal phenomenon going in the past is permissible and possible. It's jaiz, it's mumkin. Whereas the mutakallimun denied it outright. And there can be an infinite chain of phenomenon going forward in the future. And he says that's obligatory to believe because that's based on Kitab and Sunnah. But the past eternity doesn't entail that everything is eternal alongside Allah. That's his point. So a past eternity, a future eternity, he says everyone has to agree with. But the past eternity is possible, and that's all we need to affirm. That's possible. And he believes that this is this is what was taught by the revelation, the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam. Allah has eternally always been speaking, doing, moving, whatever it might be, and will remain doing that. But he attacks the mutakallimun for denying the infinite regress because of the huduth al-ajsam argument, because they wanted to affirm that the temporal origination of the world, based on the principle that you can't have an infinite regression of temporal events because that won't explain the phenomenon we have now. Okay, so what does he say then further? So he says that things are created in time, but the universals of things are eternally present with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So individual objects are created and temporal and finite in time, but the universals, the generic category, class of things these objects share in, the anwa', the genuses, you could say, the universals, these are eternal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he believes in qidam al-naw', yeah, but not qidam al-ayn. So he believes in qidam al-naw', but not qidam al-ayn. So he believes in the eternity of universals, but not the eternity of things. So what are Allah's attributes? Are these generic universals in a sense? You see, so Allah's attributes are these anwa', these generic universals. So that's why he has to accept that they're eternal. What other thing have I missed? All right, from the handout. That's what, so yeah. So for him, then, there is possible to have a past eternity, and it's obligatory to believe in a future eternity. But a past eternity does not entail that all things that have come to be from the past are eternal with Allah. That's not what it means. There's nothing eternal. There's no created object eternally alongside Allah. Yeah. All created things had non-existence. What is with Allah are universals, which are just sort of His attributes. Right, let me stop here. Any questions on that? I know I said it in a jumbled way, but maybe when you get the handout, you might be able to properly. But can you see how he's coming from a different basis from the Mutakallimun?
Steph, can I ask a question or two?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're saying now towards the end that Ibn Taymiyyah defines universals as the sifat of Allah. So it's
yes,
not akin to Platonism, where you have a capsness as a universal and instances of caps in the dunya. Does that make sense? It's now
no, he doesn't believe it. Yeah, he doesn't believe that these universals, like divine attributes, are separate. Yeah, he believes that they're just. He says they are huduth in Allah. And what does he mean by huduth? He means that they just come to be in Allah's essence. Allah just comes to have His properties. That coming to have them, he just calls that huduth. So in modern philosophy, we'll have to say metaphysics. We have to say, when something comes to possess its properties, that's what huduth means. When a subject comes to just possess its properties, that coming to possess its properties, His attributes, is just what huduth is for him. Not that they're generated, but they're like the analogy I used, because I'm trying to finish a paper on it. The analogy that I use is like, the sun and the sun's heat being produced within it by the chemical fusion, or fission, whatever you want to call it. That heat of light that's produced from within the sun is not produced from anything external to the sun, but just purely from what the sun is constituted of. You see? It's like that. His attributes are just.
So I get that.
Within Allah, they just are eternal with Him, and Him coming to have His attributes is known as huduth. That's how I understand it at the moment, anyway. Go. Finish point. Yeah.
So I presume he came to the Mutakallimun who regard the sifat as being wajibly necessary due to the essence. That's what the Mutakallimun says. Now, what's interesting, I find, is that you're saying that for him, the universals are the sifat, and the particularizations are the particularization of the sifat. So his sifat of creation is the universal, and instances of power being manifested is the particulars. So he's just applied a Platonistic theory to the sifat and then to the creation. Then the whole genus kind of universal kind of particular argument doesn't. I don't know. It's not.
That's my reading at the moment. That is my view at the moment.
But from that perspective, it doesn't sound too controversial or too different. It seems like a lovely thing again. The way Ibn Taymiyyah changes his explanation of things. Because
the reason why, you're right. The reason why he has to affirm these anwa', these universals, i.e., divine attributes, as being eternal, is because if he doesn't affirm Allah's generic act of acting, then he's gonna collapse. He believes that collapses into the Mutakallimun's view that Allah wasn't acting in pre-eternity. But the only way you're going to get Allah acting in pre-eternity without the objects that He creates or acts, i.e., the effects of His acts being eternal, is that you accept the universal or the genus as eternal, but not the particular. You see?
Yeah, but even the Mutakallimun would have something similar, though, because one of the things I think is challenged in the second part of your elaboration of Taymiyyah's understand the definition of perfection, he seems to argue perfection requires creativity. You have to create instances in order to be perfect. Whereas the mutakallimun would argue perfection is a capability. Allah has always had the capability. And for him to
So, no, but Ibn Taymiyyah, that's an impotent capability. You see?
Yeah, that's the way to define it. I'm not get that, but it's not necessarily.
That's not being a. So if Allah has the power, but he didn't exercise, but he didn't do anything with the power, that's an impotent power for him. He's actualizing his power on anything. That in effect is a meaningless power for him. Just like being a creator, but doesn't create anything. So he kind of has a snide elbow dig at the Ash'ari by saying that the Maturidi are a bit more closer.
But then he himself does accept Allah's created sincerity, though, in terms of particulars.
Huh?
Do you understand? He himself argues that Allah has not created particulars since eternity. They had a point of origination akin to the mutakallimun. The way he backpasses the argument, part of it is by saying, the sifat are universal, and the sifat are always, an active form or something, an active particular.
Yeah, they're always in. How can I say? The wheels are always moving, as it were.
Yeah, by them having that very sifat, it's automatically an acting type sifat, and it manifests itself in terms of a particular akin to the mutakallimun. I don't know, it just seems like a different kind of explanation.
Ibn Taymiyyah accepts that there are aspects to his account that he can't explain, but just like anyone else that can't explain parts of the account, because we're talking about the divine person, isn't it? Mysterious in that sense. It's beyond our scope. But he's trying to say his view is the one that is based on scripture. That's what he's arguing. And the Muslim one robs Allah of his dynamism as a basically there is no divine life. You see, the mutakallimun rob of his person.
If this is the way it's understood, then I don't really have much with it in reality. Just a different way of explaining the sifat and that, and then it's manifestation.
Sorry, you don't have much. I didn't hear. Yeah, you don't have much. What? Sorry.
No, I said if this is the way it's understood and interpreted, the whole issue of the universal in particular, then I don't think it's really that controversial, and it's not too different from the Kalamic approach, apart from a few supposed instances of conflict which Ibn Taymiyyah imagines. The way I understood it from other interpretations was that he was arguing for a Platonic model where you have, for example, the universe as a kind of universal, and then particulars of the universe. So when the universe is created, and it seems to be something independent of him and his sifat, but obviously the way you've interpreted it is different.
And like I'm saying, you're right. And obviously I need to look at this further in light of the literature that's come out. The huge literature that has come out. So I've got to go back to my notes and check whether my reading is correct or not. And obviously when you see the handout, please check it, and especially, have a look at it. But this is how I'm understanding.
Yeah. No, if this is the way it is, I don't necessarily have I don't disagree with it. I just see the different perspectives, and I can see how it can be conciliated, and I see how Ibn Taymiyyah has his own kind of, mind frame to it. But I don't see the controversy. The way I saw it previously was quite controversial in terms of him splitting the genus from the particular, and the genus is always there. And it seemed a bit, obfuscating as such. So then I was going to ask second perspective. Yeah, sorry.
No, go on.
Yeah, I was going to ask another question, but I think that's just dissolved now. I was going to ask, Ibn Taymiyyah being a nominalist, someone who accepts only particulars and not universal features of things when it comes to logic and definitions, then how does he accept these universal sifat? But then you're just saying these are sifat, so they're not universal in the sense of something totally different. So then
he doesn't accept that they exist out there in the real world. So that's why he's saying universals are not out there. Only particulars exist, concrete particulars that instantiate are instances of that universal. Yeah. So Allah's attributes, the instances of those, the attributes manifest in the world, but the actual attribute is abstract and it's universal and it's uncreated. That's how I'm reading him.
Okay. I'll ask you after that.
Definitely. So basically, he's trying to deny the mutakallimun saying that everything starts at the temporal origination of the world, that sheer beginning. He wants to just knock that and he wants to knock the metaphysics that leads to that view, which we've looked at already. I don't want to go over again. It might be worth going over your notes on that. So, and remember, he's trying to do this because he's trying to do this with regards to all of divine attributes, whether not just creativity or movement, but also Allah's kalam. He was a mutakallim for perpetuity. So that's the summary of, as I see him, trying to sort of explain that how do we affirm that Allah's always been doing what he's doing and will always continue to be doing what he's doing, accept the scriptural evidence at the same time, but deny that concrete particulars have temporal beginning but are not eternal or co-eternal with Allah. So how do we juggle all these things? He believes his account.
Mullah always had a question.
Oh, okay, yeah, tfaddal Mullah. I'm probably going to wrap it up here though, and then we'll start hermeneutics next week, inshallah.
Mullah.
Sorry, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
I'm gonna have to apologize because I've got a number of questions actually. I think I want to pick the thesis altogether, pick points of it. So where shall we start from? Let's have a look. So the discussion, let's have a look a minute. So I see that Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, Shaykh al-Islam, does not want to buy into the distinction that the mutakallimin have made vis-a-vis Allah's sifat as bil quwwa wa bil fi'l. Right? Am I correct in saying this? So when the thing that you mentioned a minute ago about Allah having an impotent power, so the mutakallimin will say, yani lahu quwwa, Allah's always had the ability to do things, but the manifestation of that bil fi'l comes at a certain time. So
yeah, but that's the ta'alluqat issue comes up, and he hates that idea.
And also like in a sense, like, so I know that Farabi and others argued that Allah's khaliqiyya, his creativeness, so his creativity grows as he creates. So the more Allah creates, the more of a creator he becomes.
That's right.
But like, so this position that Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah has argued, that Allah is always creating, like since he's a creator, he must always create.
That's right.
Creates another problem though, which is that what you said, that he's definitely creating, he's always creating, but you said that this does not necessarily have to translate into objects.
Not object, he's always creating. One, it doesn't necessarily have to translate into objects, and two, the objects aren't pre-eternal with him, if they are objects. So
the thing, the struggling that I'm having, that if they're af'al, then the fi'l needs to create something, isn't it?
That's right. But the maf'ul is always separate from, will always be separate from the fi'l.
Were you suggesting that there's always af'al without any maf'ul?
Shaykh al-Islam has to clarify that, but it seems to me from my reading, no, there's always something. But there always being something doesn't mean that they're azali. Can you see?
No. So I get that this was the next distinction I was going to make. So like the distinction of qidam bil-dhat versus qidam bil-ghayr, right? Is something that's argued, that like Jannah is qadim, Jahannam is qadim. They argue this, but bil-ghayr, la bil-dhat. Yeah, bil-ghayr. Right. Yeah. So this is something that I can see. I've not read it in detail, but I was thinking whether Ibn Taymiyyah agrees with Ibn Arabi on this issue about what you just said right now, that Allah created the world, but the world didn't come from nothing in this sense, but the materials were somewhat there, and that's the kind of argument. But then again, again, the thing I was going to make as a state is that, is this just semantics? Because the Mu'tazila argued that al-ma'dumu shay',
that's right.
So is this merely a semantic argument in saying, well, the non-existing, what the Ash'ari are calling ma'doom, or what Maturidi are calling ma'doom, is now shay according to him. So the non-existing thing is still a thing, and therefore what we're saying he created from, or what the Ash'ari are saying that he's created from nothingness. Nothingness is still something like that. So I don't know how far this goes into trying to see that, like, how you're going to tackle with this problem.
Well, the Ash'ari say that the nothingness is not is la min shay.
Yeah, of course.
So
they argue that it
wasn't a thing from which it was brought into. Although nothingness, otherwise we think nothingness is like an ism, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. So I remember this. It's in Sharia Aqaid, I think, near the end, where he presents it as as doctrine, that we consider Adam to be la shay, to be nothing. So so the problem that I have with Ibn Taymiyyah is that since he doesn't spell out his mantiq, even in the Rad, I think he's not done a good job in spelling out what his mantiq actually is. It's more apophatic in that it's not this, it's a polemic, it's a Rad. So it becomes difficult then to tease these minutiae that then potentially can have, like I said, lots of implications. And so, like, this thing you were saying about infinite regression being jaiz, as well as the opposite. Well, it's strange because then at the same time he argues, well, at least it's said that he argues that Jahannam will exterminate, right? The fana an-nar. So again, I don't know.
Continue then.
Huh?
So there'll be one thing that still continues, isn't it? Whatever, forever, whatever.
But isn't he arguing that even foreverness is still finite in according to...
Yeah, it's just never ending, because Allah's always continuing to create in the future, as well as he has been since min al-azal. But you can argue that if he believes in fanat al-nar, how to square it. But I guess what he could say is, he could say, all right, I believe in fanat al-nar collapses up, but Jannah is still, I still believe that Allah's activity of mercy is still continuing and continuing. His ghadab just doesn't continue. I wouldn't know how to.
But then isn't ghadab a qidam? No, like we've said, it's a sifa, and the sifa must continue in perpetuity according to Ibn Taymiyyah. Can you see what we're saying? So, like,
that's right.
Okay.
That's right. He has to find a way where the ghadab has to find its maf'ul bihi, as it were.
Yeah, it's mahal.
I don't know how we would do. I don't know how we would do that metaphysically. But as we mentioned at the beginning, because he's not spelling it out like a mutakallim is. Yeah, he's using nusus. He's using a qaida here. He's making a rad here. He's firing from the hip.
Yeah, it's all over the place, man. But
so someone needs to systematically bring it together. And I know I've made it more confusing today, but I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to make sense of what he's trying to say, to try and put it. I don't want to put it in kalam terms, because then that defeats the whole thing of what he's trying to do. But I'm trying to put it in kalam terms.
But you have to, though. That's my argument. That it's in a sense it's a cop out. Then I'm just gonna follow kitab and sunnah. So what do you think we're doing? Polemically, I get it, but it's like if you want to engage it, you got to engage like systematically, like we're saying. Otherwise, he needs to spell it out, I think.
Because it looks like what he's trying to do, he's trying to affirm this. He's doing ithbat of the doctrine, but via nafi. So he's saying the Muslimun are wrong here, wrong. Falasifa are wrong here. Therefore, this is the view. That could be possible one approach he's taking. So rather than giving like a view positively forward, it's based on negatively refuting the other views according to him. You can see. So it's built on rad rather than like a kind of taqdeem.
Yeah. Apophatic. Right, just one last point about this qidamun no and universal. Yeah. So you see, it becomes problematic, at least in my understanding, if if we accept what he's saying regarding the mutashabihat, that they will also be treated as sifat. Therefore, is he arguing that Allah's ayn, Allah's qadam, for example, Allah's saq, are also universals that are then eternal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not particulars?
it depends, though, isn't it? We'll have to see whether he's differentiating certain actions which require, like those actions that he always is doing, that, as opposed to what makes him as a person, that kind of thing. So his hands, eyes are attributed to him, but hands and eyes aren't things that do anything perpetually. Can you see? They're not it's not a class of things. Whereas creating is a continuous thing. Whereas having a yad is not a. I don't know how.
But the thing is, like, when I look at Taymiyyan commentators, for example, so let's take Khalil Harras, right, in the Wasitiyya, precisely arguing this, that he takes this exact position that we've got here. He'll argue that Ayn and Yad are kulli, and that we affirm them as a kulli. In fact, we must affirm them as a kulli, but then it is in relation to God. That's it. So that bit, then we don't know. But if you look at the ma bihil imtiyaz, how does that differ then from the Ash'ari stance of ta'wil? They just I guess this is going to follow up next lesson anyway. Ta'wil equals
definitely.
So like
you're right about that. I have to revisit Haras's interpretation. Is quite a harsh commentator.
No, so it's I think it's in the Wasatiyya where he argues and but Bahari, others do this as well. They argue that the mutashabihat are then to be treated as a sifat.
Yes, that's right. Which is then has implications, as you mentioned.
Hence, I'm saying, can you see what's happening here? And then the last thing I was going to say is, this thing where you talked about huduth as coming to possess, right? But then how is that any different from taghayyur? What we're saying, taghayyur al-mahal, in the kalami sense. So is he okay to say, well, Allah does undergo taghayyur, but
he has no issues with that? He has no issues with the divine essence having huduth. He has no problems with it. It's just Allah coming to have his attributes. He uses the word huduth for that. So he's borrowing the mutakallimun's term, and they to the world. He's saying, well, look, no. Allah's attributes, him just coming to have what his attributes are, I'm going to call it huduth. And what's your problem? That's how he's. But isn't that isn't that a kind of isn't it a kind of a change? And he'd be like, yeah. What he said, Allah said he's got these attributes. So you have to unpack it. He has no issues with there being Allah. He has no issues. This was the view of al-Razi later on in the Maqalib. You can see them bending towards it is complex, but Shaykh al-Islam doesn't have an issue with the things that the mutakallimun have issues with, because he's like, well, scripture tells me Allah has these things.
Yeah, but I think both of them are functioning on different platforms. So
that's what we're mentioning.
Yeah, the assumptions are very different.
They each got a different megaphone, isn't it? And they're just shouting. It's a bit like continental rallies, isn't it? When they're nada, they've got two different megaphones. It's I'll put this handout up, and then whatever we've got, just add on. Like I said, this is very old. I've got to update it in terms of what's the literature, but that's how I see him. I'm trying to work out what he's trying to say. Maybe you're right. If we do get clearer on what he's saying, it's probably not very much different from. It's not different from maybe what some of the mutakallimun have been saying.
Inshallah.
It's intriguing. He's an intriguing figure. SubhanAllah. He's an intriguing figure.
I think there's a question from someone else.
Okay. Yeah,
Sheikhna.
Thank you. Always for your contribution.
Doc, there's a lot of background noise coming from your side.
For me?
Was it not you? Oh, it must have been the Mulna West then. Sorry, somebody.
I'll have a look.
No, I don't think it's you then. It must be Mulna West. Okay, that's fine.
Cool. I'll have a look here. I'm in quarantine.
It only came in recently, we'll know, so don't worry, it was like the last 20, 30 seconds.
Cool.
We'll start Imran, if you want to come in.
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, so just one quick question, but I'll comment before that. So it seems that this, this notion of Ibn Taymiyyah's theory of God's, perpetual creativity is within, if in a kind of spectrum between Avicenna on one side, where co-eternal, and then the Ash'aris on origination. It's in between both of them, but it doesn't really satisfactorily provide a solution either way. It just obfuscates between the two positions, Avicenna and Ash'arism, from what I can discern at the moment. I'd like your thoughts on that. And then my question is regards to the first, premise of Ibn Taymiyyah's argument, which is textual, nususi based, and based upon the hadith of Imam ibn Sulaiman, isn't it? I think.
That's right. Yeah.
Imam ibn Hussein.
Hadith Imran. That's right.
G. Now, in that hadith, it talks about Allah creating the different types of arsh and so on and so forth. How do we reconcile this with the Ash'ari Kalamic approach? Would the Ash'ari just simply say, look, when we talk about creation here, we're talking about, for example, the kalam, the arsh, so it can apply to every single entity prior its existence, or do they then have a kind of explanation for the nusus? How do they explain this nusus? Because Ibn Taymiyyah uses it as a kind of validation that there are, instances of creations, and the universe came after, and therefore,
that's right. That's right. So what are you asking? How does he reconcile what?
So I'm asking, how do the Ash'ari reconcile the nusus, the Kalam cosmological argument? So do they just change the subject of the universe to these entities prior, or do they give another explanation? How do they then explain the nusus and reconcile it with, the naql?
I don't know. I'm wrong. I have to check. I don't know. Because they're only concerned with whether remember, the world is all of reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
So all the mutakallimun are just arguing for is the reality that is external to the mind or the external world. What caused it? That's what they're trying to get at, and they're not too interested. I'm saying in a superficial way, they weren't really too interested in non-empirical things or matters of the ghaybiyat. You see. They didn't work for Abe, so that wasn't a factor that they considered because it was a textual matter. You see, so if the arsh, the qalam, and all that are textual matters, then that defeats the whole purpose of why they're doing their natural theology. They're trying to show how the ultimate cause of all reality external to the mind, to us, and the world out there is something transcendent to it. So I'll have to check. I don't know how they do that. I mean, whoever, can tell us. I don't know.
When I read this article from John Hoover like years back, the way I reconciled it with their approach, the Ash'ari approach, was that to say they would change it from the universe to the first entity created, whatever that is, and then everything else follows from it. So you can encapsulate all of these things because they're creation, aren't they? And they're not the creator. So
Ibn Taymiyyah accepted the creation as well of Allah. But the problem is with them is that the Kalimun said the sheer beginning. If you say creatio ex nihilo, you're positing a sheer beginning, an absolute beginning for creation. And he's saying, well, if that's what they mean, well, I can give you textual evidence to show it can't be absolute beginning because there's something already existing prior. So the world must have been created ex aliquo, not ex nihilo.
But this is where it's the conflation, isn't it? He's reading the creation as just being the universe. Doesn't the definition allow for it to be other than the universe, i.e., anything that God creates?
Yeah, so maybe, yeah.
And the only
problem there's still lots of unpacking to do. You're right. I mean,
the only problem I see then is this: that are the things like arsh and kalam, are these, also atomistic? Because obviously this proof is based upon Johar and Art. So then
that's right. If you're going to go down that route, if you're going to go down that route, metaphysically, are they going to be excluded from your metaphysics? You see. So are they also anything? If by definition, if they're created, then they must fall into that metaphysical, those metaphysical categories, the atomistic metaphysics. So I don't know is what I just always thought. Generally, the Mutakallimun never brought ghaybiyat into their natural theology. because it's not going to do anything for them. It's not going to help them in any way.
And lastly,
but yeah,
sorry.
What I was going to say is lots of unpacking to do on this. But it's interesting. Can you see how one contrasting view brings about other issues? Not what it does. It helps shine light on the other view. So yeah, so it's interesting. I've not learned Ibn Taymiyyah's view on creation from any Aqidah lesson. So I'm doing this kind of for the first time in a lesson. And so even my thoughts on it, and I would appreciate the help in trying to get it clarified. It's very complex, very complex.
Just one last question, Saf. Generally speaking, when Ibn Taymiyyah is obfuscating or is difficult to understand, people go to Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Do we have any research on him, via him on this?
Here we don't need to go to, I haven't checked Hafiz ibn al-Qayyim, that's the second layer, isn't it? But here we don't have to, because he's also mentioned in other works which have now come to light academically, which weren't accessible before. You see? So when I did the notes, obviously I relied on Hoover's translation, but the metaphysical stuff of Ibn Taymiyyah, that's like about 5-6 PhDs that have come out already on that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true, yeah.
And obviously the publications of those PhDs have now been published. So that will help us shed further light on the secondary literature, will help us shed light on maybe further.
The one I suggest is a new one by a guy called, or a brother, I think he's a Muslim, mashallah, Rodrigo Aiden. His PhD at Chicago was with Ibn Taymiyyah. And he discussed an article on this as well, actually, and from Subki's perspective, and another Ash'ari scholar, I think, in the Muslim world. He's doing research on this.
Yeah, definitely. I remember you talking about that as well, which I haven't had a chance to add on to this handout, which I think you made it available to me, and I skim of it, but I haven't added it onto this.
600 pages. So.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it?
Anyway, Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, barakallahu feek. So my apologies, we said we're going to start on Hujjat al-Islam's Ta'wil and literalisms, but we'll all do that the next lesson. I'm sorry for taking up the whole time with this, but I thought it'd be a helpful contrast to the view of the Mutakallimun, just so you know what some of the sites of contention are, what the tussle is about. And for Ibn Taymiyyah, just to conclude, in the end, it's about Allah not being stripped of the qualities that he's attributed to himself. That's the issue for him. He doesn't want to do ta'til. All right. Jazakumullahu khairan ahsan al-jazaa for all your contributions for today. Inshallah, I'll post the note up, and then love to get your feedback on it and your help on clarifying the issues, inshallah. So until our next lesson, make dua for us, and I hope the fast goes well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.